Hi, Rick. Good to see you
Hi.
both.
All right. So, to all of you watching in, thank you for your patience. We'll get rolling along. So, we were just talking about the overview of the webinar. Rick will introduce himself, and then we'll hand it over to you, Scott, to introduce yourself a bit, and we'll get rolling. So, Rick Rusaw, why don't you just introduce yourself and how you got up to the point of your involvement with Gloo?
Absolutely. So I was lead pastor at LifeBridge Church out in Longmont, Colorado, Boulder area. And along the way, Scott and I got connected up working on city things and strategies. One of his staff members and I co-wrote some books called Externally Focused Church, and we did a number of those. And it was about, if your church disappeared, would anybody care, and how does it get involved? And then along the way, Rick and I've got connected around entrepreneurial stuff, and love what you're building up there in Canada, Rick, and enjoy the partnership. But been with Scott on his executive team the last 3 years, and really bringing big tech and big data. Scott has a huge vision for connecting the global Christian ecosystem, enabling the growth of every individual. And it's going to take tech and data to really do that. And so excited about how we're linking churches together and showing you what we're doing today. And Scott has one of the more unique backgrounds of most people we know, and looking forward to you guys getting to hear about that.
Right. Well, just if I can ask a follow-on question. So in sum, you've been part of the church environment as a pastor for most of your career, so to speak. Maybe just highlight quickly the role of innovation in some of the things you've done as a pastor in a church context.
Sure. Churches tend to be kind of laggards to most things. We respond. One of the things that maybe it's my New York upbringing, didn't grow up in the church, but I always thought that we ought to be real people with real faith in a real world. How do we show up? And so our church started engaging, and we're in a really liberal area in Boulder. Started engaging our school system. And when I left, we had 90% of the mentors were from our church that were in the public school. We started getting involved with foster care and ended up helping our state reduce the number of kids who needed adoption out of the foster care system, to where that led to 22 states asking our church to come and help. And we launched a thing called America's Kids Belong, and are doing that and actually starting to go international with that. Single moms was another huge need. And we launched a thing called Pearl Group that's now in a half a dozen cities. And we talked to universities around us, giving free education to any single mom, upgrading their job skills, and provided microfinance and auto transport and childcare for single parents. And so for me, it was always about how do we utilize the people in our church, marketplace leaders, to actually help us sort through these problems and figure them out. And sometimes in the church space, we tend to be, people like Scott and others are so intimidating to most pastors. And what I find is they're looking to use their gifts to make a kingdom difference. And if we can bring those two
Right.
things together in the faith space, then good things can happen. So.
Yeah, no, that's great. So basically, innovation and entrepreneurship played a big role in your time as a pastor and led to a whole bunch of exciting initiatives. So that's great. Scott, maybe just give a brief summary as to your background, and then we'll dive into some of the details.
Sure. So Scott Beck, married to Teresa. We've been married 36 years. We've got 4 daughters and 4 son-in-laws, and 4 grand dogs. They claim to be working on grandkids, but we haven't seen the progress yet. But we've got a lot of grand dogs that are percolating around.
Right.
Teresa and I have been on a dual path journey. It's really one integrated life, but we've been playing it out in both the business space as well as the ministry space for the last 35, 40 years. Always have been involved in helping industries get the benefit of their collective scale. So was involved in the waste industry in the early years. My dad was a co-founder of Waste Management. So I grew up in that business and learned about going from a bunch of mom and pops to, obviously one of the world's largest companies there. We were involved in Blockbuster early on, store 1 to store 7,000, and same thing, bringing some cooperative capabilities to that video ecosystem. We did that in the bagel business, and we did it in the home services business, and in retail and in dentistry, and all along the same time, we were helping out ministries. And, like Rick said, we've had since '93, we've had full-time people on our staff serving into city movements and serving into churches and serving into recovery as a family office, right? We deployed an enormous amount of donative capital into that market between '93 and 2010. And in 2010, we decided to put our full-time energies and efforts against putting, in effect, an intranet for the church and the global faith ecosystem, so that ecosystem could get the benefits of access to technology that they couldn't access on their own,
right.
Access to different things that they couldn't access except together. So that's the journey that we've been on.
Yeah, no, that's a great overview. So what I'd like to do now is just sort of highlight some of the things that you've been involved with, because I think it'd be of great interest to the people listening in and to myself. So let's just go back to Blockbuster. It's obviously such a famous business name, and in your bio, and you mentioned it, that you were involved with Blockbuster. When you say store one, well, that's about as ground level as you can get. So maybe just describe how you got involved in Blockbuster and what it was like, and then obviously you saw some potential in it. So how you got, how you spotted it, how you got involved, and how it grew from there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what a fun story. It was in August of 1985. I had the good fortune to walk into the first Blockbuster video store.
Which was where?
It was in Dallas, Texas, at the intersection of Skillman and Abrams, around the Village apartment complexes in Dallas, Texas. And it was week 1, day 4. I was member number 91. So member number 91 in the world. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, this looks like McDonald's and IBM had gotten together and decided to build a video store. It really solved a lot of problems that, there were already 13,000 video stores at that time. It was a giant mom and pop industry. And, everybody on this call probably remembers they were a little seedy, and, they just weren't, they weren't bright and big and easy to use. And so the guy that created this was a guy named David Cook, and he had really come up with a great formula. So that's when we decided to get involved, and I got my dad, and the two of us formed a partnership, and we bought about 10% of the company. And then I became the first franchisee. So that was 1985, and became the first franchisee and opened some stores got the franchise territories for Chicago and Detroit and Milwaukee and Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Atlanta, Georgia, and started opening stores as the first franchisee.
Well, that's great. No, in terms of identifying the opportunity, because I'd like to just zero in on that, because of course, a lot of people will say in retrospect, if I would have walked by the first McDonald's, it would have been obvious it was a great idea. If I would have seen Blockbuster, it was obvious it was an idea that could grow. But it's really interesting for you to mention that there was 13,000 other stores out there. So what led you to think, okay, this store is different and has the potential to scale?
Well, I mean, it was extremely professionally done. It did a couple things that were really good. One is it took, I'll just grab this. It took this little, and they put the video inside of this, so that then when you left, there wasn't an empty spot on the shelf. There was still the original art piece from, and that made all the stores look full, even though if they had a lot of things that were missing. So that was like just a good idea. The other thing I liked about it is that they had used barcodes. So they used barcodes and they had really good computerized systems. It was really easy to check in and out. Another thing I thought that was really good, it was very large and it had a much broader selection than most other video stores. I like that. I thought that was really valuable to the customer. And they also had I liked it that they had a 3-day rental policy where, you know, you could rent for 3 days, and that gave you a little bit more flexibility. But the other thing that it did is it gave you the ability to rent more movies. So, you know, when you only have one night to view the movie, you're going to rent less. And what we found is when they give you 3 nights, then you probably even rent more than what you can watch in the 3 nights. But you sort of think that you could watch them in those 3 nights. So there was a lot of things that were really just right about it.
Right. So not just the core concept, but a lot of these aspects of the execution. So no, that's great. That's great. And then what do you think was the key to the rapid expansion? Because obviously the ability to go from 1 to 4,000, there clearly was a lot of talent or systems or procedures in place.
Yeah, I mean, there was. I mean, when we sold it to Viacom, it was we had gone to 7,000. So we opened one Blockbuster every 16 hours for, you know, basically 10 years. And, you know, it was built around a system. The guy that created it was a guy named David Cook. He was a software engineer, and he, you know, like the most important thing was the system, was the rental system, was the warehousing system. You know, he was just a really good systems thinker. And so that was super important. So, you know, getting that core system idea, yeah, they would, when a store, and this is the truth, when there was one store, he already had a full distribution center all set up to be able to support many stores. And he also had it set up so that it could literally, the whole store came together in that distribution center. They could put it onto a truck. You pull, the last thing they put on the truck would be the carpet. The first thing that you would take out would be the carpet, and you'd pull the carpet out and put that down. Then the second thing would, you pull out the shelves and you put those up. Okay. And at the very end, you'd have a desk, and inside the desk, there would be pencils and pens, and you would pull that out, you know. So it was a very good systems thought around how to do it. So it was that. And then, you know, then you need to be able to attract the right people. So they knew they wanted to do franchising from the beginning. So I was, you know, I like I said, we became the first franchisee. And then, yeah, you have to be able to attract capital. It actually was a small public company from the beginning. So it was a public company even when it had one store.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah. Yeah, it was a repurposed public entity that was in the oil and gas software business, a company called Cook Data Services. But
right.
we're getting into a lot of details here. But
yeah,
that I mean, you know, it was built to scale. And then, you know, Cook wanted to get out. And when Cook wanted to get out, he was looking at selling to either Southland, which had 7-Eleven, or Cox Communications, which had, you know, the Atlanta newspaper, as well as, you know, big cable system, and television stations. But that didn't make a lot of sense to me. So I introduced it to my dad's partner at Waste Management, Wayne Huizenga. And then Wayne came in and bought out the owner, the Cook. And then Huizenga, you know, he from Waste Management, he really knew how to access capital and access talent. And then I went to work for Wayne Huizenga, and, you know, hey, Wayne's the guy that made the thing grow like crazy.
I heard a while back that every startup needs a honcho, someone who's got a plan and a vision, needs a hacker, someone who can build the tech and the system, which is obviously Cook was that guy, and a hustler, someone who can go sell the thing. And so it sounds like that Blockbuster had that from the beginning, Scott.
Right.
Yeah, it did.
So just one last question on Blockbuster, because it's such a famous brand name and company. So when you exited, what was the reason for the exit? And did you, and what do you think of what happened to Blockbuster afterwards?
Yeah, a couple things. Number one, we exited because Wayne made the decision to exit. I had decided that I wanted to, transition into other industries. Taking the Blockbuster success and then doing Boston Market and Einstein Bagels and the like. Wayne was just at a stage in life where he wanted to, sell the business, and it was sold to Viacom at the time. So Sumner Redstone bought it. Wayne became vice chairman of Viacom for a short period. That wasn't going to last very long. And then, I think that was the thought. And, Wayne, there was a lot of conversation around video on demand and what has basically become Netflix, or what has become all the streaming services. So they were talking about the streaming services. There wasn't anything there that was a surprise. But what happened was this. When Blockbuster got sold to Viacom, Blockbuster ceased to have its own strategy. It became a tactic in Viacom's strategy. And Viacom's strategy was to aggregate content. So they used Blockbuster's cash flow to buy Paramount and then ultimately CBS. And so it was just, Viacom had a strategy and Blockbuster ceased to have its own strategy, and it became a tactic in Viacom's strategy.
Yeah.
And that's not the fun story. The fun story is, hey, Blockbuster could have bought Netflix for $50 million in 2002. Hey, if Blockbuster would have just followed the strategy that we had laid out in 93, there wouldn't have been a Netflix. It just wouldn't have been, because video on demand was not, it wasn't like rocket science that was going to happen. Everybody was talking about it. But once again, that's not what Viacom cared about. What Viacom cared about was aggregating, CBS, Paramount. I mean, literally, they took Blockbuster's cash flow, immediately went and leveraged it up and bought Paramount.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really interesting point. Well, I want to just move on to one of your other entrepreneurial ventures, which is also a well-known brand name. So maybe talk a little bit about the origins of, Boston Market, Boston Chicken, because I think people will be familiar with those names. So what was your role in the start and the development of those concepts?
Well, Boston Chicken was created by a couple guys in Newton, Mass, and they had built a really nice business. Think of it as a little bit of a takeout deli with rotisserie chicken and homemade sides. And so that concept sort of came to a partner of mine, a guy named Saad Nader, who had come across it, and he liked the concept. And so he brought it to me. And then the two of us had worked together at Blockbuster. And then there's a guy named George Nadaf, who was a franchise king. And George wanted to franchise Boston Chicken. And we had some negotiations, and we ended up buying a controlling interest in the business. When we bought a controlling interest in the business, it probably had 12 stores. So somebody else had developed the concept, and we got involved at that point in time, and we grew it to about 1,600 stores in the early mid 90s. Went public in, I think, 93, maybe 94. Same time Starbucks went public, same time Outback went public, same time Cheesecake Factory went public. There's a bunch of Papa John's. They all went public in that same market. We did that probably in 1994. And so that was that. And then we ended up at Boston Chicken, which we renamed Boston Market. I think we did some things strategically that were wrong. And one of the things is that we definitely grew too fast relative to our capital structure. We kept putting on convertible debt as opposed to just issuing equity. And as a result of that, we leveraged up our balance sheet. We ended up having a little bit of a downturn. We had to then go do a restructure. We ultimately sold that business to McDonald's, and then McDonald's took about 60% of the locations and turned them into McDonald's. And then once again, it wasn't Boston Market strategy; it was McDonald's strategy. Boston Market became a tactic and McDonald's strategy, right? That was another example of that. But then another thing that came out of that was Einstein Bagels.
Well, I was going to say, just before we get to bagels, because I find that also quite interesting. When you look at it, how would you describe the uniqueness of Boston Chicken, which became Boston Market? Like why did it grow? Like, what was the unique aspect of it?
It was what we called home meal replacement. There was, one of the things that God's always given me a pretty good ability to see a small amount of data and see something in the future. So, one video store, you look at that and you go, okay, I could see this. Looks like it would look like this. And the same thing with Boston Chicken. Healthy food was trending. Made from scratch was like people were pining back for the day. Our first commercials were, no microwaves, no fryers, it's morning, Boston Chicken is, milking the cows and bringing in the stuff from the fields and
Picking out a few eggs from the barn,
plucking the chickens and, making it all available for you fresh, never frozen.
Yeah, that probably inspired Martha Stewart.
Well, I actually worked with Martha Stewart. We worked with Martha, and it's a strange story. I was actually in Martha's kitchen having lunch with her when OJ was acquitted, but which is sort of like one of those things that you remember where you were when JFK was assassinated, or when OJ was acquitted. But we were talking to Martha about basically being a spokesperson for Boston Market because of its sort of hominess.
Well, I want to get on to Gloo, but before we do that, I just want to finish one other entrepreneurial story, which is regarding bagels. I love bagels like a lot of other people. So what's the story behind Einstein Brothers Bagels?
Well, when we had the infrastructures at Boston Market and we were able to open so many units, and we had real estate and accounting and systems and human resources, we were looking around, as many restaurateurs do, what other concepts are out there. And we looked at bagels, and the same thing. And bagels was just starting as a national trend. And, it's like, hey, the market's probably ready for a bunch of bagels. So we bought 5 bagel companies, Offerdalls down in Florida, Bagel and Bagel in Kansas City, Brockman Brothers Bagels in Salt Lake City. And these were all like chains of 5, 6, 7, 8 stores. So we bought those, we pulled them together. We then did research and said, hey, do we want to have, Bagel and Bagel steam their bagels, and Offerdalls boiled their bagels. And that was a big debate. Is it a steam bagel or is it a boiled bagel? So, we did research, we made some decisions, and we ultimately picked steamed because they were easier to execute. They were better for sandwiches, and we thought provided some better better shelf life, better flexibility, better manufacturing process, so on and so forth. So we made the decision to go with steamed bagels. Now we have steamed bagels in the country. That's basically the standard now. And then we pulled all those concepts together and we named it Einstein's. And at first it was named Einstein's. It wasn't Einstein Brothers. Right. And although we did have the 2 little guys that are the logo.
Right.
These guys over here, this guy and this guy.
Right.
For those 2 little guys. when we originally did it, it was Einstein's. And then we took a little bit of heat from the Einstein estate.
Yeah.
And so then we made it, we already had two little guys, so we made Einstein Brothers. And so
I
that's
was
how
wondering
Einstein,
about, passing off and, did Einstein really eat a bagel? Is there a photo of him eating a bagel? So,
right. And if there was a photo of him eating a bagel, we'd probably even been in work shape, because then they would have, wanted that likeness. But yeah, so then we opened, about 600 of those in 3 years, and got that rolling. So.
well, that's a great entrepreneurial platform and phenomenal experiences. So what I'd like to do now is, and just to let everybody know, we're halfway through our 60 minutes. And if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, just go to the Q&A tab. So I'd like to segue into Gloo and talk a little bit about your faith journey also, because people listening in, they're Christian marketplace, entrepreneurial leaders. So maybe we can just flip over to you, Rick. Maybe talk a little bit about Gloo and how you got involved, and then we'll circle back to Scott to talk about the founding and some of the details. So maybe just describe for people like what is it? What is it in a nutshell?
Yeah, I think what I love about what Scott envisioned, and it really started with, how do we champion the growth of every person on the planet? And that happens in a relationship way. Well, how do we facilitate that? How do we make that happen? And the church has always lagged around tech and data. I had the opportunity to help what today is one of the largest privately held cooperative databases in the U.S. Get started, and recognize our church was able to use that data. And it really helped us do some things. We did a weekend. I went to all the restaurants in our city and asked if we could, on Tuesday night, their slow night, if you came from LifeBridge, would you give them a discount of 25%? They all agreed. Maybe 20 restaurants agreed to that. I promoted it among our young couples in our church. We did childcare and stuff for their kids at night, every age level. And then we, using the Wyland data, we targeted young families in a 20-mile radius of our church with children present at home. And we picked up that night maybe 300 new contacts we wouldn't have had. And so my personality was wired to try to, how do we use these things to help grow the church? How do we help people connect who aren't interested in connecting? And so we did a lot of things like that. And when I heard Scott's vision for bringing the capabilities of big tech and big data and do it in a for-profit company. And so, Scott, I want to make sure you hit why it's in for-profit, because you can't do this. You can't access the capital to pay for these things. When you think about what's going on in mergers around the globe today, big companies merging, so they have, because they can't afford tech and they want bigger tech and bigger data and customer journey and all of those things. The church in the US and North America, Canada is what, a $500 billion industry, maybe more than that. But we operate like we're a mom and pop grocery store. We're all one off. And so Scott and I heard a guy say to us one time, I get what you're doing. You can't roll up, right? You're not going to get churches to merge together, but you could do a roll down if you provide the infrastructures that they're going to operate off of. And so I care about pastors. That's a passion for me. I care about churches, and I see the opportunity to
We'll see if maybe Scott, if you want to. I assume Rick will get unfrozen, but
the ability to do what they do best, but us bring the capabilities to them to do that.
Yeah. Hey, Rick, you were just frozen for a sec, at least at my end. But just to summarize it, so for people listening, the part of the idea is that there's a lot of data out there that would be useful in terms of who to contact, who might be interested in what a church is doing. So your example of, let's say, couples, let's say, with one or two young kids living in certain areas, and let's say there's 5 churches in that suburb, but they don't have the capability to really analyze it. So is part of the idea that Gloo would be able to say, okay, we have data on this particular suburb. We understand demographics, how many kids there are, where they're living, maybe income levels. So if you, let's say, want to start a daycare center at your church, that this suburb, that would make sense. That one over there, maybe not. Is that?
I think that's part of it, Rick. And really what we've initiating with here is actually even more basic than that. Think about when fiber came to your city, right? All the big companies brought it in, but somebody had to bring it the last mile to your house, right? And what we're doing now at Gloo is bringing the collective power of the church, but building that last mile. So to introduce people who are looking for hope or peace or something for their marriage or their finances, they don't even know that churches care about those things, right? In your culture, you're even ahead of us on the de-churched process in Canada. And people are looking for those things, but they don't know that a church provides that. Churches have the capability to help meet those needs, but they don't know how to find the people who are looking for that. And so what we're trying to do is build that last mile, help explorers connect in with a local church.
So just so people, just so people understand one of the aspects of the concept, would it be that, let's say, again, in a certain city or certain suburb, people have marital challenges and they feel they want help. So would they get online and they start looking for where to get help? They don't know a church exists, but somehow you're tapping into those people. So you can say to the church, hey, here's X number of people that we're connecting with who need the type of help that you could provide.
Yeah, I'll let Scott elaborate on how we're doing that. But the real opportunity is, if you think of what Scott's done, I love his line that, I really only know how to do one thing. And I did it with garbage, and I did it with food, and I did it with videos, and did it with dentists. And now I'm trying to help church do that, which is to use the collective power of that and to scale that up. And so what we're doing is not just us, we're partnering with others, doing cooperative advertising. That's one cooperative. That's a basic beginning place. And so people are seeing, if in the US, there's a campaign launching called He Gets Us. And it's telling people that Jesus can identify with you. And if you click on the chat for that, or you go to their website, we're powering the infrastructure for that to happen. But we're also then, if that person says, I'd be interested in looking for a church to help me with that, we're connecting them with a local church in their area that can meet that need. Mm-hmm. And so it is using tech, it is using data, but it's using the collective power of that.
Right. So yeah. Scott, maybe you can explain why and how you founded the company and what was the driver behind it.
I'm going to stick on the example that you gave, and then I'll step back to it, Rick. So every industry has basically gotten to some level of economy of scale as it relates to promotion. All right. In the garbage business, you got enough garbage companies together, so now you can have a waste management open, right? And you can do things because you've aggregated enough promotional dollars. In the industries that don't have an aggregation, they've created ad councils. So in the United States, we have a thing called Got Milk. And that Got Milk advertising helped all dairies, all milk products, all same thing. We have a thing called The Other White Meat, which is basically the pork industry. And we've got the What's for Dinner is the beef industry. Well, we just basically saw that there was no ad council for the church. So we created one, and it's called Churches Care. And so once we created that ad council, now we could aggregate dollars, do that advertising, Rick, that you're talking about, and then be able to deliver people into those churches with really good economies of scale. I've got a little video that I'm going to play so that you can see it, and then I'll go back and answer your other question.
Gloo makes it easier for people, churches, and programs to connect to each other. Our goal is to help your church serve more new people and see more lives changed each week. So here's the reality. People all around your city are asking questions, big questions, questions your church would love to help answer. Things like this, or this, or this. They need and want to talk to someone. The problem is that they're asking those questions here and not there. Why is that? Well, firstly, many people don't know that churches want to help them. They think church is just for Sunday mornings. The other reason is that when people are asking these big questions online, they're getting answers like this. Well, no wonder. But that's where Gloo comes in. Now, when people ask questions like this, instead of that, they'll see this.
So when they see that ad, no one church can afford that ad, but together they can, right? That's the power of the cooperative. So we've created, in effect, the Ad Council for the church as one of the offerings at Gloo.
And when they click, they'll find a message of hope and an invitation to connect. Then, if that person wants to talk more, we'll route that request to the closest church. And just like that, there's a new face in your inbox. So what do you need to do? Well, first, make sure your Gloo profile is up to date.
So this Gloo profile, what this allows us to do is to be able to know what ministries and what programs are in what churches, and what churches are willing to accept what types of people. And so once we've got that data, it's like knowing what people want to watch in their home, right? So now we know what kind of movies to serve up to them. We know what kind of explorers to serve up into a church. So it's not just the closest church, it's the closest church that's the right fit.
Today. Next, designate someone on your team or grab some volunteers to respond to these invitations. From there, you do what you do best. Build relationships, whether it's a phone call, cup of coffee, or even just a word of prayer. Questions are being asked all around you. Gloo invites you to step into those conversations to reach and serve more new people each week.
So that's an example of, oh, I see. We basically can become part of this, and we get, people, and then you do something like this in the 4 cities that we've been running this thing in. We've been able to deliver into those churches about over 20,000 potential congregants have basically been delivered into those churches in the last 4 months. So pretty simple, right? Cooperative promotion, digital connectivity into the church, know the churches, know the people, match them, make that whole thing happen. It's sort of like, somebody on Airbnb, know enough about the person, know enough about the home to get the right people connected to each other. So, yeah. But that bring it home pretty clear?
Well, yeah, what I'm trying to do is just so people understand, from a practical standpoint, how it works, and also what some of the ramifications are. You hear this statistic quite often. I'm not sure if it's an urban legend, but this idea that 90% of all churches are 200 people or less. Whatever the number is, it would reflect the fact that most churches are small, although the mega churches would get all the attention. So if you're a small church of 200 people, the pastor, as Rick can attest to, is overworked, underpaid, doing too many things. How could a small church possibly get access to information like this? So is that the type of, because I like the idea, the concept, or the comment you made earlier, I think it was Rick, this idea that, we're a mom and pop approach to a very large environment that needs what the church can offer.
Yeah, there's nothing simpler than signing up, filling out a profile, and receiving people in your inbox. That's about as simple as it gets. Right. And it takes about 15 to 20 minutes, and you don't need to have anybody on staff. And the smallest churches, those 200 person churches, that's our bread and butter.
Right. What I love about it, Rick, I pastored what would be considered a large church, 3,000 or 4,000 people on a weekend. And we could afford to do marketing. We could afford to try to target things. We did big events, all those things, because every church does 5 things, right? They want to attract people, get people, grow people, keep people, grow people, multiply people, right? And so if there's ways for us to do that more effectively and efficiently, we want to try to do that. But what I love now is a church of 200 in a city where there might be a church of 5,000 is on a level playing field, because people are discovering them just as much as they're discovering the large church. So it really does broaden the reach, and the opportunity, and it takes away all the one, it's affordable. 2, we help them build their profile so they can identify who they're more capable of helping. Some churches want to help people in recovery, and some churches don't have the capability for that. And so we're only serving you people. If someone's saying, I've got an addiction issue, we're only sending them to churches that have clicked the box, we can do recovery. And the churches who don't do that aren't having to deal with that individual. So there's a lot of opportunity with this.
So can you describe, because again, the people listening, they'd all be parts of churches of different sizes. So maybe just describe very briefly, what it costs a church to participate in this.
A small church is going to pay $1,600 a year. A large church, $3,300 a year.
Okay, so that's pretty affordable. And I would have to think there's lots of churches which are probably have somebody on payroll bumbling around trying to figure out how to do research and things like that. All right, so I want to ask a few questions because again, we've got entrepreneurs who are listening in, and we'll see the recording later. So Scott, maybe talk about how much, you're building this massive platform. Like, what are the resources required to do this, to get it to this stage? Because from our previous communications, I realized this is a massive undertaking. Maybe just describe the size of what you're trying to achieve here.
Well, first of all, it's a really big ecosystem, right? It's hundreds of billions of dollars a year that are in these, when you aggregate up all the churches. And, we've spent about a decade working on the infrastructures. And what we just showed you, Rick, was like one thing of 10 that we do. We also help people connect to more people. We help churches connect to more people. We help them know their people in partnership with Barna. We help them move their people in partnership with people like Carrie Newhoff, who's a great Canadian partner of ours. We help them get benefits from their networks. But we've spent about a decade, about $175 million of equity has come into the business. We're doing a financing now. We're doing about a $50 million convertible note financing as part of the business.
I almost feel like I should stop and just emphasize some of those numbers, because when people hear 175 million and another $50 million finance, that's a lot of money, and that's a lot of time, effort, expertise to build this. Yeah. So why don't we talk about it from a faith standpoint? What motivated you to obviously you're pushing this ahead to make it a success like your other ventures have been. So that's a massive commitment. So what's been the driver for that?
Well, our whole career has basically been doing this, bringing infrastructures to industries. And, it's starting in 93, I made a decision for Christ in 77, 93, we built a family office. We started, deploying a lot of donative capital into this ecosystem. We made a lot of donations and out of our family foundation. And then by 2010, I was like, hey, there's some problems out there that got to get solved. And somebody's got to solve the problem of getting these churches on a common set of infrastructures in order for them to benefit from their scale. Because otherwise they're just not going to benefit from their scale. I didn't see anybody else out there doing it. I believed it was something that needed to be done. Once again, it was like seeing a little bit of a Blockbuster video and saying, hey, there should be a lot of these. These churches are going to need the benefit of technology. They got to band together to get it. So then that's why Teresa and I set off on the journey and started intersecting people like Rick here, but we also intersected people like Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of Intel. Pat's one of our major investors. He's also chairman of our board. The Green family out of the U.S., Hobby Lobby family, they're investors. They're a member of our board. Thrivent Financial, likewise, they're investors. They're a member of our board. people that thought, yep, these things need to get built. So we've been working on it for about a decade. And yeah, it's a lot of work and we've made a lot of progress. We're excited where we're at. And, for me, it's the extension of what my calling is. It's what I've learned how to do. And it's applying that to be able to advance the kingdom. And so it's not a lot more complicated than that. It's like, okay, it's got a giant purpose. It's got a giant economic opportunity, and it's an enormous intellectual challenge. So those three things turn me on.
Yeah, no, that's
hey,
Rick,
while you're headed there, I get the opportunity of a front row seat with Scott, and I watch the integration of his faith and passion and experience intersect into this, with a real desire to serve the church, and for Gloo not to be the he's not looking to build Gloo to be the big Gloo name. He's looking to provide these infrastructures to, honestly, some part-time pastor in a storefront church in a place that most of us probably wouldn't visit, right? So he, that's a day in, day out. How are we bringing the power of these technologies? I watch him do that like all day long, every day. So just consistently.
Oh, that's exciting. So what's the traction been like? Now, I know on the website, I think you've got some numbers there, but maybe just describe like what's the response of church leaders and what's the overall traction?
Yeah, we're making great progress. We in our free, all the Barna assessment stuff, that's free. We've had over 25,000 churches that have joined the platform as part of that. Which is when you look at the size of the churches, that represents about 10% of the market. And then, now we're scaling up the paid motion, which is, $1,600 to be able to get connected to Explorers, and you also get the SMS infrastructures and some things like that. And, we're signing up typically right now about 15 churches a day to the platform. We'd like to see it get to 50 a day. Actually, I had a good last couple of days. We had 50 a day. We had 70 one day. We had 50 another day. But we'd like to get it to about 50 a day in terms of churches signing on. That would get us to where we'd like to be, which is about 20,000 paying churches by the end of the year.
Right. So when you started, I think you mentioned that you have the churches that, so they're not paying yet. You got them on sort of demoing and then trying to move them to being paying.
Yeah, we got them on using a free value proposition where they could use the Barna assessments in their own churches.
Right.
And that was free. And now the connect to more people value proposition, that's paid. So we're then converting them and adding new into the paid.
Right. So I had a question regarding the model, because, sometimes in a church context, some people don't believe in paying for certain things. So why did you adopt the model, let's call it a commercial model, where people will pay to get value for something? So why did you set it up with that type of model?
Well, a couple things. Number one, if you're going to get the power of the collective, you got to get somebody writing a check, right? Somebody writes a check. And in this ecosystem, it's always the donor. So now the question is, who's the greatest aggregator of donor capital? Churches. So you've got to have a value prop that works for the church, so the church will write a check. Because then you've got proven value. They're writing a check for that value. The more of them that write the checks, the more money there is to build better infrastructures. The better infrastructures, the more churches, the better the infrastructures. The more churches, the more promotional dollars, because we take about 50 cents on the dollar from what we receive from a church and put it back into the ad co-op. So the more churches, the more advertising, the more explorers, the more churches. So everything that we do is designed around that model. Now, the reason that now you could still have that same pricing model and be a not-for-profit, or you could have that same pricing model and be a for-profit. It's just a question, are you going to have the church pay? It's essential to have the church pay, because that's where most of the money is. And, that's the way to keep the flywheel going. Number two, though, is why did we become a for-profit company versus a not-for-profit company? And that really has to do with access to talent and access to capital. Because as a as a for-profit company, we can go access capital markets that churches can't. Stock markets and for-profit investors. And if we were not for profit, we would be competing with them for their donors.
Yeah.
And it's never good to compete with your customers. It's just not a good philosophy, right?
Right.
So if you're going to serve your customer, don't try to steal their customers. Okay.
Right.
And so that caused us to know that we needed to be a for-profit entity. That's allowed us to raise $175 million. It allows us to go do a $50 million debt offering. You can't do that as a not-for-profit.
Well, I do want to ask just quickly, the people investing, do they expect to get return on their capital, return on their investment?
Oh, absolutely. These are not donation dollars. These are
Right.
These are investor dollars.
Right. Okay. So just lastly, so we've got 4 minutes left. And so I'd like to just, from each of you, get a bit of a wrap-up comment by way of encouragement, maybe to other entrepreneurial leaders. How do you combine your entrepreneurial spirit and talents with faith and making a difference? So maybe, Rick, if you just give a bit of a wrap-up comment, and then I'll get Scott to.
Yeah, sure. I think that, Ephesians 2:10 says that we're God's workmanship, created in Christ to do the good things he's prepared in advance. And for those entrepreneurial leaders, I think it's going with that gifting you have. You see opportunity, you see things others don't see, you know how to combine things, you look for the cracks to work through, and you ought to work that. You ought to go with that. And the kingdom opportunities are massive, and it takes creative. Every leader needs to think about 3 things every day: vision, where are we going, right? Bottom line, can we actually get there? What's the resource? And succession, who am I bringing along that's replacing me in this process? And I love that most entrepreneurs I know kind of think down those terms.
Right.
I got a big dream. How am I going to make it happen? And then who am I bringing along with me to engage in this thing?
You can never have too many entrepreneurial leaders. So, Scott, over to you. How would you sort of wrap things up?
Well, first of all, we do this because we want to serve the men and women out there on the front line that are, battling against all odds every day to be able to, win one more for Jesus, or to be able to help one more relationship be solvent, or to be able to help one more person find their right place and vocation. And so, we exist to serve those champions. That's why we do what we do. And to be able to allow them to get the benefit of their collective might, because ultimately, the Bible is really clear that, the body is the body, and no one has got the answer. The answer is in the whole, right? So we're just trying to connect that together. As it relates to the entrepreneurial journey and, faith and work, just don't think of it as the sacred and the secular. I just encourage leaders to integrate their faith in their work. Whether that's, being able to, think of like Pat Gelsinger, he thinks of Intel as his church, and, those folks, and he thinks of that as his pulpit, right? And, maybe you saw him introduced last night at the State of the Union. He's out there with his faith right on his sleeve, and he does a great job. I think that's we're all given talents and a little bit of money and relationships, and just use them to be able to advance the kingdom every day, everywhere, every place. It's just, and then some people will align their businesses with them more explicitly, like we have, and other people will be more tangential. But it's still you're working with people every day. Make a difference. For Jesus.
Yeah, no, that's a great summary and a great way to wrap up this webinar. Well, I'd like to thank both you, Scott and Rick. That's been a great discussion of the faith-based entrepreneurial spirit, a great description of what Gloo does, and I really appreciate your time, both of you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks.
And thanks a lot for those of you who listened in. Appreciate your interest, and if you'd like to get further information, let me know, and we'll go from there. So thanks a lot. Okay,
Thanks. Bye-bye.